Welcome to the One Take, Conversations with Global Mobility Leaders. I'm delighted to welcome Austin Fragomen, Partner and Executive Committee Chairman at Fragomen. Welcome, Austin.
Oh, thank you very much, Lynn. Delighted to be here.
So, Austin, you've had an incredibly distinguished career, and it's fair to say that you invented modern business immigration law. I want to take you back to 1968 when you worked on the House Judiciary Committee, the place where immigration laws are made. Congress had recently passed the 1965 Immigration Act, which opened our doors to immigrants from all countries based upon their skills and family ties. In signing the bill, President Johnson said, "This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions. It will not reshape the structure of our daily lives or really add, importantly, to either our wealth or our power." Clearly, he was wrong. What didn't he see back in 1965?
Well, I think that he was consumed with the Immigration Act as a sequel to the Voting Rights Act. And he saw this as an anti-discrimination measure to make sure that all aliens seeking to immigrate to the United States were treated equally. I think that was his goal. So he didn't really focus on the composition of the stock, you might say. In other words, what does this look like ethnically or racially? And of course, there was a tremendous impact because 1960, you have to remember that 84% of immigrants were either from Europe or Canada. So that was a pretty telling fact. Now, in reality, virtually none at that time, or very few, came from Asia. So the big difference, so to speak, in terms of his perception and what happened was the massive immigration from Asia once Asians were allowed to immigrate. As you all probably remember, under the national origins quota system, which was first the quotas were imposed, I think, in 1921, and the act was in 23. There was a Asian exclusionary provision. Probably the biggest surprise was by imposing a Western Hemisphere ceiling, and for the first time, previously the Western Hemisphere was exempted from the numerical limitations. It actually caused quite a surprise because it followed closely on the heels of abolishing the Bracero program, which allowed temporary workers from Mexico to come to the U.S. So what happened was there was a great increase in Mexican immigration, but it wasn't really legal immigration necessarily. Just as the precursor of what we see today. So he was wrong in a number of aspects, and of course on the contribution level, I think the facts speak for themselves with all the Nobel laureates and scientists and accolades received by immigrants. So that I think we're all well aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly think that the tremendous growth that our country's seen over the past 60 years and the prosperity is due in large part to our open immigration system, which today is not quite as open as we have decades-long backlogs in certain categories and, a huge competition to get worker visas. What is it? What else is it that we don't see today about migration?
Well, I think that, and it isn't just the U.S., it's pretty much a worldwide phenomena. I'd say that what we're missing most in our analysis is the importance of demography. What we have before us is we have a fertility rate in the United States which is below the replacement level. So to grow the economy, you need more labor. And so the only way that the U.S. Can have a positive growth in the labor force is through immigration, unless there's some draconian policies that the government enacts to greatly increase fertility, giving $10,000 a child or something. Um, but um, but anything short of that, I think that the reality is that that population growth is going to be a big factor around the world, and there's going to be a deficit of natural population growth in most of the industrial and advanced countries. And so they're going to have to rely on immigration. And they should be thinking about this because obviously if you know this in advance, then you design an immigration system that will give you the skills and the backgrounds that you need, the capabilities for the workforce, and obviously desirable people at the same time, and and with all the considerations for that we have, for diversity, et cetera, because we know that's actually been a major plus in immigration. So I think the bottom line is the lesson that should be learned is that if we're going to have a robust immigration system, we should select who comes, not let them select us.
I think that's a terrific idea. But let's talk a little bit more about business immigration. So I think we've had for a long time general agreement that immigrants help contribute to economic growth, but yet it's been so tough. You and I have worked together since 1996 trying to get the H-1B cap raise, to get changes in the backlogs, reductions in the backlogs of the per country limits, other things around the world. What's happening? Why is it so difficult to make some of these changes?
Well, I think what's really changed is the attitude in Washington. When we formed ACIP um, back in it was in 1970, we actually 72. The thought behind it was to act as a trade association for corporations, and at that point, as we weighed in from then until you joined us, Harris Miller was did a terrific job in 1990 and in '86 with the Immigration Reform and Control Act. We were a major player through our lobbying efforts, and the difference then was that people listened to us, and they listened to us on both sides of the aisle. As recently as you well know, because you were a major player, as recently as 2013, when there was a 68-32 vote in the Senate to pass comprehensive immigration reform, you could talk to people on both sides of the aisle. And that's what's different. It's become such a partisan issue that you can't get both sides together to have an intelligent discussion about policy.
So certainly it's become much more difficult to have those conversations, and I think part of that is driven by misunderstandings and strong feelings about the border. Why can't we just separate business immigration from what's happening at the border, from family migration and other issues, and solve the problems that are easier to solve?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? I think that's difficult to do. Um, we the efforts that have been made to treat specific immigration problems, we'll call it a piecemeal approach to legislation, have met with little success. Right at the moment, the partisan feuding is at a such a high level that neither neither party really wants to concede anything on the issue. With we note a very narrow exception, which was the EB5 legislation that deals with foreign investment, persons who invest substantial amounts of money in the U.S. And there was a agreement reached, and these amendments dealing with integrity programs and raising the investment amounts were able to be placed into the omnibus budget bill. Now, there have been efforts to legislate through reconciliation. And of course, the advantage of both of those situations is they only require a majority vote in the Senate. Um, but short of that, it's really very difficult to foresee any issues that are likely to go through, particularly more important issues with more with broader applicability. And I think to myself, the one exception that might really test this is if we have a real crisis, which we might have with the dreamers, the young people who've come to the U.S. and when they were very young and lived here their whole lives, but were not born here and don't have any legal status because their parents don't. Um, right now, there's an effort to regularize the dreamers through adopting a federal regulation, and this would be in consideration of a current status where they're just awaiting a resolution based upon a court decision, Supreme Court decision for that matter. So that's if in fact this regulation is finalized, which it's already been announced, and their comments have been received. So I would guess that if this were challenged and if it were found to be in excess of authority of the agency to make a regulation on such an important public policy issue, I think there'd be a very good chance that if it were found to be ultra vires, that Congress might act on this particular issue. It's one of the few issues that there seems to be a consensus on, and in fact, there's a bipartisan bill being worked on right now. I understand being kind of led by Graham and Durbin, is my understanding. So it'll be interesting to see whether it is possible to legislate in a piecemeal manner.
I think it's fair to say that we've got to use all of the tools in our arsenal when we're trying to change policies. It's interesting to me how creative some lawyers are getting with looking at new visa pathways. Legislation or litigation is much more pronounced than it ever was back when I started in this area, and then the rulemaking too. So I think it's going to take a lot to change policy, but I guess, is it fair to say we need corporate voices, we need the service providers who are in the mobility space to help us with these efforts?
Oh, absolutely. I think as you recall, back to some of the legislative issues that we dealt with, we managed to orchestrate quite a good campaign, and we're joined by a number of other organizations, such as your organization, WERC, who's really done an outstanding job in this field, and there are several others as well that really stand out. The chamber particularly. And I think the voice of business is really key. And I think honestly, we've lost it a little bit through our through the corporate community not being unified enough and speaking with one voice. And I think that we need to really activate that voice. And I think the big issue right now is the where we could really make progress is on the per country limitations, which cause these massive backlogs for applicants for permanent residence, particularly from India and China as well. And I think that's an issue that corporate America should really make a big effort to get resolved. And I think that once again, that's an issue where I think there is a consensus by both parties that this is something that should happen.
Yeah, Worldwide ERC has an immigration policy forum that continues to work on these issues. So we'll do our part to push forward. But let's talk about the rest of the world. You and I have been involved in discussions at the United Nations since early in the early 2000s, when they first kind of started looking at migration and realizing it was a critical issue around the globe. Um, let's Have you seen greater progress over the past 20 years in other countries than we've seen in the US in terms of embracing the ideas we've always put forward for efficient, transparent, and predictable migration systems?
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the really impressive takeaways or results of COVID. Not much good came of it, that's for sure. But what it did is it forced a number of governments to digitalize their process. And it caused a tremendous leap forward in terms of simple things like entering countries. And now you go, I mean, I just recently went to Italy and had to do nothing. And in fact, there weren't even any lines. You just, essentially, they look at your passport, they put it in their little, reader, and that's that. And you're admitted, and vice versa when you leave. So it's really been remarkable in terms of the advance in technology, and I think we're going to see much more of that in immigration systems, even to the point of adjudications being automated to a great extent. But probably the most remarkable thing that we've seen is an issue that you and I have been very involved with for a long time, which is the global competition for talent. Because as the world shrinks and countries start looking at their need for immigrants, and which is what's happening, some of them have done some really clever things. I mean, Canada, for instance, just announced a direct pathway for foreign graduates of Canadian universities to authorize their work in Canada while their applications are pending for work permits. The UK has established a new legal pathway for high potential individuals now who graduated from select universities. Now we can argue whether the government should select the universities. I mean, that's a different issue. But the basic concept behind it is a very smart one. That if you educate foreign nationals, you should give them a chance to stay in the country and be able to choose from them. The UAE has a golden visa for the highest talent. Um, Singapore has this talent pass, and they've gotten been very successful in attracting a number of people from Hong Kong, particularly. And the U.S. has even stuck their toe in, and I really call it a toe, which is by having 3-year OPT, that's optional practical training for graduates in STEM fields. But of course, we had that already. and then national interest waivers for persons in STEM fields without a job requirement, which is certainly a step in the right direction. And O1s for persons with PhDs in STEM fields. That's pretty narrow. I don't know a lot of people with PhDs in STEM fields. But at the end of the day, what we see here is we see countries coming up with systems to attract top talent without requiring employer sponsorship, to build a pool of highly talented persons who are employable, and then basically allowing them to stay in the country. So I think I think that we have a lot to learn from this, and we being in the United States, we really have to step up our program, and instead of discouraging foreign students because they can't get H1s, with only 25% of applicants being selected. We're basically going to drive away very, very highly desirable people, and they're going to seek education in these other countries. So they're very much a competition.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of that. And you said not much good came out of the pandemic, but I think one of the other great things is we all realize now, or many of us can work almost from anywhere. And so certain countries have embraced this new concept of nomad visas. And as you said, they're putting the individual in the driver's seat rather than, the employer. So, as you look across your clients and, we have research that shows that companies are starting to accommodate employees who raise their hand and say, you know what, I want to go work in one of our foreign offices. And where in the past they might have said no, the companies are accommodating that. So how are you seeing, nomad visas and remote work changing the nature of corporate immigration compliance?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to distinguish between remote work and nomad visas. I mean, remote work has posed quite a challenge for immigration systems around the world, because typically these immigration systems are built on employer sponsorship, particularly for non-immigrant visas. And of course, that's all driven by the place of employment, and whether they're in many cases, whether they're persons in the domestic labor force that are available in that location. So, of course, when you have remote work and no requirement that you live anywhere particular, then the question is, where's your place of employment? Is it, wherever you happen to live? And if so, do you run ads in the, local newspaper and, and in some remote location in Maine, because that's where you happen to live, to see whether there are any U.S. workers. So this quite the remote work has created quite a challenge, and I think governments are beginning to get their act together on, how to test the labor market, how to look at things more nationally, and how to get their system sort of updated to the contemporary phenomena. Because one thing that's for sure after COVID is that remote work is here to stay, and there'll be more and more instances. The nomad visas are really an offshoot of this. In a few enterprising countries, basically said, "Wow, if there's remote workers and they can come and work anywhere, why don't they come and work here?" Now, many countries have the rule that they make it pretty simple. The Caribbean, particularly, like Barbados, you basically have to show that you have an income of $50,000 and means to support your dependents. And if you do, then you can get a visa, a nomad visa to work in Barbados. Now, some countries say, well, you can't work for a domestic employer, because if you work for a local employer, then of course you need a work permit. So therefore, kind of the standard is you could be self-employed, or you could work for an employer abroad. And generally, there's just a salary requirement, a net worth requirement in order to qualify for this visa. So they become very popular. I know a lot of companies, for instance, we've used them pretty extensively with Russians when companies place them and want to place them in a different location to work, but they'd still be, working remotely for the company located in a different location. So in any event, I think right now there are actually 36 countries that have nomad visas, and 12 more are in the process of adopting them. So pretty close to 50. So you can see their popularity, and it just kind of shows what the future is going to look like in immigration by offering new pathways to do things that companies and individuals in terms of basically trying to structure a situation in work and the workplace that is conducive to the employees.
I think all of that's so exciting, and I'm an optimist that things will get better the next 50 years. But what about you?
It's interesting. Let's go back to demography for a minute because that's what's really going to drive everything. Because you're going to have countries that have a fairly substantial birth deficit, and therefore need probably a lot of workers. And you're going to have other countries that are going to be, particularly the developing countries, their demographic trends look like they're going to be really overpopulated and have a great deal of difficulty trying to find employment for everyone. So, rather than having a massive, even a larger, right, undocumented worker population in the world, we have to create legal pathways and be smart about it because we're going to need these workers, and there's no reason. Like the United States, for instance, has probably, if you think about it, 8 million persons working here without proper status. Well, that's if you look back, I mean, that's the natural growth of the Bracero program. If we kept the Bracero program, at least maybe we'd have circular migration like we used to, where they would work here seasonally and go home for part of the year or go through normal processes. So I think you're going to see countries working together in partnerships. You're seeing some of that already, where countries will enter in, or companies in those countries will enter into contracts to educate and train persons for immigration to a new host country who might fund the education or help some developing nation with their for instance developing medical facilities and whatnot, and at the same time training doctors and nurses and medical personnel for immigration to that country. So I think we're going to see those kinds of partnerships. And we're going to see overall migration numbers are going to be much higher. I mean, the number of labor migrants in the world is pushing 200 million as it is, and that number will even go up. So I think we're going to see and we're going to see a lot of challenges, right? Because we have the climate, and we have the all the different problems with with integration and these diasporas, and we want to avoid having a massive brain drain. And we have to encourage circular migration so that when persons go and work in a host country, they'll at some point bring those skills and abilities back and use that as a development tool, and also leveraging the diaspora communities and abroad to help finance and work with the communities back home and producing products. And we see some of that, but it's really on a micro scale. So I think the UN will play a big role. Lynn and I have been in, we've been involved in the Global Forum on Migration and Development and the Global Compact on Immigration, and these will become more important documents and more important areas because we're going to need best practices worldwide, and we're going to see a lot more mobility.
I agree with you completely on that. You know, the history of the world is one of migration, and that's not going to change. I just hope we can all be smart about it so that everyone benefits.
Correct. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really have appreciated our conversation and wish you very well.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I enjoyed it as well.